Good evening, everyone. We're ready to get started. We are on Eruvin, Daf Yud Zayin, and Emir Hashem. After a challenging piece of Gemara or two tonight, we will get to the end of the parak, Baruch Hashem, and then we'll move on to other halachos of Eruvin. Okay, here we go. We're actually about 15 lines or so, give or take, from the bottom of Tez Zayin Amud Beis at the two dots. We had spoken about in the Mishnah, which was 1/3 of the way down from this page on Tez Zayin Amud Beis, which is a Mishnah that spoke about using ropes to create some type of eruv. So the Gemara here, 2/3 of the way down, says makifin b'kanu v'chulei, and the Gemara here makes a simple but important qualification: b'shayara in b'yachid lo. This applies when you have a grouping of people, b'shayara, like a caravan of people. We assume this number to be 3, that there are a number of people there. But had you been by yourself, we would not allow you to use this lenient type of eruv. It's not considered a lechatchila eruv. It's considered a somewhat b'di'evet eruv. Says the Gemara, v'hatanya, is that really true that it's not allowed b'yachid? When you say not allowed, it seems to be that you can't carry at all. But that's impossible because Rabbi Yehuda the Tana writes, Kol mechitzos Shabbos lo hitir liyachid yoser mibeisa asayim. All of the mechitzos of Shabbos we are not allowed to use for more than a beisa asayim. Now, beisa asayim, as we learned about, is an enclosed area with this b'di'evet, this lightweight eruv, and no matter what the case is, it seems to be here that we allow a beisa asayim. So the starting inference here of our Gemara is that a yachid is not allowed to use this particular eruv. Yet here we see that he's allowed a beisa asayim. So which one is it? Says the Gemara, Kedamar Rav Nachman ve'itema Rabbi bar Abaye lo nitzrocha ela litein lahen kol tzorkan. We're not saying that you need to give nothing. When we say b'shayara in b'yachid lo, we're saying that when it comes to a yachid, what we're talking about is that they get the beisa asayim, and that's what the Gemara means here. And then the Gemara says this line about lo nitzrocha ela litein lahen kol tzorkan. Where did it come from? Heicha itmar. De Rav Nachman ve'itema Rabbi bar Abaye. Where did this line come from about giving kol tzorchan, about making sure that they have the minimum amount of a beisa asayim? Again, we had our inference. We questioned the inference. The inference was a yachid gets nothing. The statement from Rabbi Yehuda was, yes, he does. He gets a beisa asayim. And the Gemara answered, when we say nothing, we mean a beisa asayim. That's what we answered. Where is this mari makom from? Says the Gemara, ahad etznan kol mechitza she'enu shel shasi ve'arev eino mechitza. We have in a Mishnah that says that if you have a mechitza that's not made in lattice, with up and down, vertical and horizontal crisscrossing, that is not considered a mechitza. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. So on that shita, says the Gemara, Umi Yama Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Hachi. Did Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda say that the only eruv is one that's made in lattice with horizontal and vertical poles? Is that really true? That's a very strict shita. Says the Gemara, V'hatanya, we have in a brisa, Echad yachid ve'echad shayara lechavalin. We see that whether or not you're a yachid, or if you're a shayara, you're more of a group, you're allowed to use ropes. So we see there that that we are allowed to use ropes, which is only arev, which is only shesi, but it's not arev as well. And then this is a brisa. The brisa then continues. We already have our question on Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. We'll recap the question shortly, but let's finish the brisa, in which the question is quoted. Uma bein yachid shayara. If that's the case, that you can use ropes for both an individual and for a group, then what's the difference between the two? The Brisa responds, Yachid nosin lo beisa asayim. If you have one person, you give him this area of a beisa asayim. Shnayim nosin lahem beisa asayim. 2 people also get the same amount. Gimel, once you hit 3 though, then the volume of space changes. Na'asesh na'asu shayara. That's then considered a shayara, no longer considered yachidim. We're up to the number 3. The nosin la beis shesh, and we give them a space of 6. It's 3 yechidim basically, times 2 sa each, and they get this space of 6 sa for the 3 of them. Divrei Rabbi Yossi, the Rabbi Yehuda. So we see very clearly that a yachid is able to have a base sa, and that's a stira according to the shita that we saw from Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, where he seemed to say that he gets nothing of the sort. It has to only be shesi v'arev, but you're not allowed to use one that only has. You're not allowed to use an eruv that only has one. And the Gemara then, the Brisa then quotes a dissenting opinion against Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Every person always gets what they need. We don't combine people into one group. We don't even make a distinction between a yachid and a shayara as it relates as it relates to this group of people, ubilvad, with one very important caveat, one that we'll spend a little bit of time on the top of the next amud, ubilvad shelo yehi beisa sign panui, provided that there is an empty space in the volume, an empty area in the volume of beisa sign. If you are giving a yachid too much space, then the Eruv is not kosher. It is a maximal space of a beisa sign, making sure there isn't extra space of a beisa sign. So now, just to recap our question, we were trying to figure out in what context did we learn that this principle of litain lahen kol tzorchan, that a yachid is able to get a beis sasai. And we saw a contradiction between Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and himself, where seemingly he only allowed initially an eruv to be shesi v'arev, where there's horizontal and vertical poles. And then we saw that he even allowed it just in ropes. So here says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman v'itema Rabbi Rabbi lo nitzroch ela litain lahen kol tzorchan. This is where we see the application of the line. It's in regards to this question, this internal stira minei ubei within Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda, and there the Gemara answered by saying kol tzorchan, that when we said that a yachid, that anyone is allowed to use ropes of only one direction, that means he only gets beis sasai. Namely, Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda has two tiers. There is the ideal tier of a mechitza, which is shesi v'arev, lattice work, right to left, top to bottom, everything within 3 tvachim in both directions. It's basically a wall. It's like sometimes you see in concrete, they lay down rebar, they pre-make it into this frame, this lattice. That's what it looks like. It looks like or maybe the lattice of wood that you'll put by the side of your mechitza. That's the Spitz model of absolutely. But if you use the lesser version, a shesi or a arev, but not both, under those circumstances, the yachid would be able to get a beis sasai, and that's where we got this principle from. And that brings us to the next two dots. Darash Rav Nachman, 5 lines from the bottom of Tes Zayin Amud Beis, says the Gemara in the name of Rav Nachman, Mishum Rabbeinu, and there's a girsa change here, Umanu, and who is this person? Shmuel, says the Gemara. What did Shmuel say? Yachid, this is similar to the machlokas we saw above in the Tanait. Yachid, nosnin lo beis sasayim. When you have one person, he gets the requisite 2 sa area to carry on Shabbos. Beis, if there are 2 people, nosnin lahen beis sasayim, they also will get 2 sasayim. Gimel, what if you have 3 people? Then we're no longer talking about yechidim, then we're talking about a shayara. We have a group of people. Now, Gimel nasu shayara, v'nosnin lahen beis sheish. So the Gemara here says, it seems that when we look at this sheet of Shmuel, that shavkas rabbanan, ve'avadid k'Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Now above, we had 2 shitas in this regard. We said that we don't really care if it's 1, 2, or 3 people. Everyone gets kedei tzorchan, whatever they need. But the sheet of the Chachamim, the sheet of the Chachamim said that everyone gets what they need. And Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda said this version of one person gets 2 beis, the second person gets 2 beis, and once you hit 3, now we're a shayara. So then the Gemara says in the name of Shmuel, it seems that Shmuel's paskening against the Rabbanan and like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, because that's what he quoted here, that Yachid nosnin lo beis sasayim. Says the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom, Shavkas Rabbanan, Shmuel, you seem to have ignored the opinion of the Rabbanan and followed the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. So Rav Nachman comes back and says, Hadar Okim Rav Nachman Amora. Rav Nachman came back with a statement and said, Alei, the Dorash, Dvarim Shamarti Lifnechem Tosheim Biyadi. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Rav Nachman was modal ha'emes, and he said, I'm sorry, I misquoted. I did not say the right thing. Here is the right thing. Biram kach amru. This is really what it should be. Yachi nosin lo beis sasayim, shnayim nosin lahen beis sasayim, shlosha nasu shayar v'nosin lahen kol tzorcha. Now, if we were to do a comparative analysis of this answer to anything we've learned prior, this is no shita. It's not Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and it's not the Rabbanan. Because Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda said one person gets 2 beisa, the second person gets 2 beisa, and the third person becomes a shayar, they get 6. The other opinion of the Rabbanan said, stop with all the numbers, everybody gets whatever they need. And this opinion is a blend of both of those answers. Let's read it again. The first part sounds like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. It says, Yachid nosnin lo beis sasayim, shnayim nosnin lahem beis sasayim. That's good. So far, so good. That part is like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. But the last part of the line, and the last part of Tes Zayin Amud Beis is Shlosha Nasu Shayar v'Nostan Lahen Kol Tzorchan, not the language of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara is bothered by this as we turn to the top of Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Reisha, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda v'Sefer Rabbanan. It seems to be that the beginning of the line was just like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, but the end of the line, quoted by Rav Nachman, is like the Rabbanan. Says the Gemara, you're right. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Taka does have Taka does have a blended shita here. It's a little bit more complicated than we would have thought. Mishum dekai avua b'shitze. He's following like his father's opinion. That's why we see a little bit of a blended shita here. But inherently, you're right. It's not exactly the opinion that's quoted in the Gemara, but we stretch Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda's opinion to agree to his own father's opinion, as we have the language in the last two lines of Tez Zayin Amud Beis. Now, we've spoken about the idea that there is a maximum amount of space that someone could get with a non-ideal Eruv. The cases that we've been talking about so far, the ideal Eruv is when it's Shesi v'Arev, when you have lattice work, poles that are, or any material that's both vertical and horizontal, and enmeshed together, kind of like a weave of some kind. That's the ideal. And when there are less ideal Eruvin, in this case, only Shesi or only Arev, only one direction. So there we do allow for people to use that, but only up to a base sum. But we also added in the din that if a person is in that space, there cannot be an extra two base sum. It has to be the right amount. So says the Gemara, two lines up from the top of Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, Amar of Gidal Amar Rab, Shlosha b'chamesh asurin, kisheva mutarin. There are times that three people are not allowed to be in 5 sa'ah, and there are times that three people are not allowed to be in 7 sa'ah, which doesn't seem to make sense, because if there are 3 people in 7 sa'ah, it seems like there's a lot of extra sa'ah going around. So how does all of that work? Amrulei, Amar Rav Hachi, did Rav really say this? It sounds backwards. It should be that 3 people are allowed to be in a space of 5 sa'ah. That should be allowed, and yet you said it might be usur. And it should not be the case that 3 people could be in 7. So then the Gemara says, how does Rav make this work? Amar Lahu, Oraisa Nevi'e Uksive, Torah Nevi'im and Ksuvim. What does that mean? Take a look at Rashi, to our right, about an inch above where we are. Says Rashi, Oraisa Nevi'e Uksive Shvuahi. The next time you want to make a promise to someone, do it this way. On Tanakh, on the Bible, Oraisa Nevi'e Uksive, I'm making you a commitment. This is exactly what the Amar Rav Hachi, this is exactly what Rav said, that sometimes 3 people would be usher to be in a space of 5 sa'ah, and sometimes 3 people would not even be allowed to be in a space of 7. How does it work out? Amar Rav Ashi, my kasha, I don't even understand what the problem is. Dilma Hachi Kamar. Maybe here's what's going on. Hutrachu l'sheish v'hikifu b'sheva. You really only needed 6 sa'ah, but when you ended up making the Eruv, you made it 7. How much here is extra? 1. And afilu b'sheva mutarin. In that case, there's no problem at all. There's only 1 extra sa'ah. Lo hutzrechu ella lechamesh v'hikifu b'sheva. But let's say you only needed 5, an area of 5, but you were hikifu. You made the eruv of shesi or arev, not the ideal eruv, the lower standard eruv, but you made it for 7. What's left over? 2. Afilu b'chamesh asurin. So then you have a scenario where itaka would be forbidden because you have base sign, you have an area that it's not cordoned off, but it's an area that's too much space for the yachid for a b'diavad eruv, and therefore it would forbid the whole eruv. Says the Gemara, how is it that we define this extra base sign? What is it that we're trying to say that when there's 2 extra sa, is it relative to people? Says the Gemara, no. Lo panui mikalim. We're saying that there's no use for the extra space. It's completely extraneous. And when the yachid is using the b'diavad eruv, when the yachid is using the eruv of either shesi or arev, but not the ideal eruv of shesi and arev, then we say that if there's an extra 2 sa where you don't even need the space, even for kalim, that's too big, and we cannot rely on the lenient eruv under those circumstances. 10 lines down, Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Itmar, Shlosha umeis echad mehen, shnayim v'nitosfu aleihem. Let's say there was a case where you had 3 people, and you built this bad eruv around these people. It was the perfect size, but then meis echad mehen, 1 person died, and now you have an extra base saying. Now you did the math right the first time, but never, somebody died. So now the eruv that you're in, are you allowed to carry? It's only shesi eruv. It's not the ideal eruv. And we have a rule that in the non-ideal eruv, you cannot have extra space of base sign, and there's a relative scale to people. If one of your people die and now you have an extra base sign, what do we say? Do we say the eruv is kosher or pasel? Do we say that? Or let's say the other way, shnayim v'nitosfu, and let's say you built it be'isser. There's only 2 people, you built it way too big, but then another person showed up. In other words, do we look at the moment of Shabbos as it enters, count the people, count the space? If it's a good ratio, then we're good. Or do we say, no, it's just numbers at the moment? How do we look at it? Is it when Shabbos ends, like the world of Muksa? We say that Migudis Katzai Ben Hashmashos, is katzala kolim kula. That's a rule by muksa in general. If it was muchan by shkia, by bein hashmashos, you can use it the whole Shabbos. If it's not muchan, it's aser. Do we say that that's where we look? Are we looking very myopically at that one moment when Shabbos lets in? How many people and what's the ratio to space with this bad eruv, or no? So says the Gemara, that's a machlokas. Rav Huna v'Rav Yitzchak chad amar Shabbos goremes v'chad amar diurin gormen. According to one of these Amoraim, we don't yet know. We'll see in a moment who's who holds what. According to one, they say Shabbos is gorem, namely, whatever happens at the moment that Shabbos enters, that's what we look at. And the second shita says it depends on who's there at that particular moment. If somebody dies, even though you went into Shabbos with the right shear, but if somebody dies on Shabbos and now there's extra base sign, you can't carry anymore. Okay? So then it says the Gemara Tistayim, we could conclude that the Rav Huna who the Amar Shabbos goremes. The Rav Huna was the one who said that we look at the moment that Shabbos enters. The Amar Rabba, boy me Rav Huna, uboy me Rav Yehuda. He asked a question of Rav Huna and of Rav Yehuda. Irev derech haPesach v'nistam haPesach. Let's say that you made a particular Eruv in a particular place and then one of the walls closed up. Or derech chalon v'nistam chalon mahu. Or you did it with relying on an open window and now the window is closed up. What's the din? What happens to the Eruv? Is the Eruv invalidated because something changed on Shabbos? So we can already see the similarity in cases because the change happened after Bein Hashmashos on Friday. So says the Gemara, but Amruli, they said to me, Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda, both Amoraim, of course. But Amruli, they said, Shabbos hol v'hutra tistayim. So what do we see? That Rav Huna gave the answer that we only look at the entrance of Shabbos. If at the entrance of Shabbos that window or door was open, the Eruv is still kosher, you're allowed to carry still. Same thing. This is maybe davar l'soch davar. We're extrapolating. So because that was true over there, the Rav Huna held that there. Mistama tistayim. We should conclude that over here in our case as well, that when the numbers were perfect on Shabbos, at the beginning of Shabbos, and then someone died, we would then say that Shabbos is gorem, and it should still be permissible to carry there. Says the Gemara, Lema, maybe we should say that this machlokes of Rav Huna v'Rav Yitzchak beplugta de Rav Yossi v'Rav Yehuda k'miflagei. Just to get our sheets straight, Rav Huna said that we only look at how many people are in this bad Eruv and the volume that's there. We only look at that Eruv based on the beginning point of Shabbos. Mash'en Kain Rav Yitzchak was of the opinion is that we only look at a snapshot in time of who's in that space at any particular time. Right? So that was our machlokes. Let's see how this compares to Rabbi Yossi, to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. It's not halfway down Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Chatzar shenifrata mishnei ruchoseha. You have a chatzar that's broken at each end. V'chein bayis shenifrat mishtei ruchosav. A house too, broken at both ends. V'chein mavui shenitlu korosav o lechayav, where its beams came down or the lechis were taken down. What's the din? Machlokas. Mutarin la'oso Shabbos ve'asurin la'asi lavo divi Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said that it's mutter for that Shabbos. Seemingly, he only looked at the entrance of Shabbos. It was kosher that by the beginning of Shabbos, we're allowed to keep it, just like Rav Huna. Masha'en kain Rav Yossi omer, imutarin la'oso Shabbos, mutarin la'asi lavo, imasurin la'asi lavo, asurin la'oso Shabbos. Manavshach. We just look at it again more narrowly, the same way that Rav Yitzchak was going to look at our case, where he said, we just need to look how many people are in this space. Is it the right number of people relative to the space available? Is there an extra 2 base? If there is, then it's not a kosher Eruv, and if it isn't, then it's a kosher Eruv. So that's what the Gemara wants to recommend. That Lema Rav Huna de Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Yitzchak de Amar Rabbi Yossi. Like I already explained, maybe this machlokes is matched to our machlokes. Says the Gemara, no, that's not correct. Amar lach Rav Huna. Rav Huna, who held that Shabbos was the snapshot in time by our case of how many people are in this particular area, says the Gemara, Ana de Amre afilu le Rav Yossi. I could even agree to the stricter opinion of Rav Yossi, who kind of looks at it more at the sliver in time on Shabbos. Ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Yossi hasam ela deleis nehu lemechitzos. There, Rabbi Yossi only held the way that he held because walls literally broke down in the chatzir or in the house or in the mavui. But in our case, hacha isnehu lemechitzos. We have walls. They're not great walls. It's a b'di'evet mechitza. It's a b'di'evet eru, but at least we have walls. So says the Gemara in the name of Rav Huna, you can't make this comparison because our case has a b'di'evet eru. Your case, admittedly, the walls broke down. Therefore, the cases are not comparable. And similarly, the Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, Ana da'amrei afilu the Rabbi Yehuda. I don't have to limit myself to being the way that you understood me. I could even follow the sheets of Rabbi Yehuda. Ad kan lo kama Rabbi Yehuda hasam ela disnu l'diurin. Acha leisnehu l'diurin. Here, it really depends what's going on. Nobody else, it depends who's living in the house and who's not living in the house. And because of that, that feature of people living there is not comparable. And therefore, you can't compare my shita to theirs, and we reject the comparison. Doesn't mean we reject our machlokes. Our machlokes is still a machlokes. Do we look at the, just to summarize this section, and then we'll move on to the next one. Do we look at the number of people in the area of this bad Eruv? Do we look at them at any one moment, or only as it relates to the entrance of Shabbos? Is it more like the world of Muksa? This is how Rav Huna looks at things, that whatever is happening during Bein Hashmashos is what we look at. If the ratio of people to space in the bad Eruv is good, then it's good, and if not, then not. Or no, do we take the more strict opinion at every moment, even past Bein Hashmashos, we look at in isolation and say your ratio is off right now, not kosher. Your ratio is good right now, then the Eruv is fine. The Chachamim said in our Mishnah, Echad Mishnei Dvarim, what was that going back on? If you keep a finger here and you look back at the Mishnah on the top half of Tezayin and Beis, you'll see there was a machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Huda, who said we needed Shesi ve'arev, a mechitza of both horizontal and vertical, and the Chachamim argued we only need one. We paskin like the Chachamim. That's why if you remember when those kind of plug-in sukkahs came out, the white ones that kind of like fall into place, you've seen them around with like the tarps and whatever, they all come as one package. So it's interesting to note that at the bottom there are 3 brackets, each of which were within 3 tfachim of one another. And they had a little space for a thicker flat band, about 1 inch each, which was what we learned earlier in the Mishnah. Why did they do that? And this came up with my sukkah. I asked this question to Rabbi Ephraim Friedman Shlita many years ago, that if you have a tarp and the walls of your tarp billow more than a tefach, your walls are not kosher. I didn't know that. Now I have a porch, so the porch has fixed walls, so it doesn't really make a difference. But my initial sukkah was like this homemade thing, and I had to all of a sudden change everything. I had to put up hooks and measure and run wire because that didn't billow, but the tarp did. So a lot of that played out, but that's a little bit of that, and we do paskin like the Chachamim that we don't need Shesi ve'arev, we only need Shesi or Arev. Nevertheless, the last shita that we saw in the Mishnah of the Chachamim was actually very similar to an earlier shita in the Mishnah of the Tanna Kama. That's why the Gemara says, Hainu Tanna Kama, answers the Gemara, Ika beinayu yachid b'yishuv. The nafkamina between these 2 shitas is what we would say about a yachid b'yishuv. If you have a person who's a yachid out in the desert, we're going to be more lenient. But if he's a yachid who wants to make his own eruv here in town, so then we'd be a little bit more machmir. That would be the difference between the Tanna Kama and the sheet of the Chachamim. Masnisa, a new Mishnah, an easier Mishnah, unrelated to some of these nuances of Eruvin, at least for a couple of moments. Says the Mishnah, Arba advarim patru b'machane. There are 4 things that we were lenient upon in a machane. We'll see what machane means in the Gemara. Number 1, mivin eitzim mikol makom. You can take wood from anywhere. Let's see, Rashi, Dibur Hamaschil, Mivin Asim, 5 lines from the bottom, Ve'ein Choshishin Legezel. Go into someone's yard, take their firewood. Why? We'll see in the Gemara. Next, what else do we see in our Mishnah? Uptur Mirchitzas Yadayim. You don't have to wash the Tilas Yadayim. This is not brought up in the Gemara, but it is brought up in the poskim. What happens if a person is, they have to eat, and they have nowhere to wash? They have no water, no stores in sight, no stores for 50 miles. So what do? So the halacha is that in regards to mayim achronim, one is obligated to walk 4 meal in order to find water to wash netilas yadayim. That's 18 minutes per meal. That's 72 minutes of movement toward water. The poskim asked, do we extend this to driving, or does it only follow the measurements of walking? Good question. And then on the flip side, mayim achronim, there we say you'd have to be willing to walk 1 mil, an 18-minute walk, before you would sacrifice that. We'll speak a little bit more about mayim achronim in the Gemara today because it does come up. So it says our Mishnah, there are 4 things that were exempt in the camp. You can take firewood, and you don't have to wash the tilas yadayim. Umi demai, we don't have to worry about demai, which is food that we're not so sure if it was tied, that was given to us by Anam Haaretz, and mila arev. And for making an eruv, of course, that's why it's here. We'll have to see what the connection point is to us. Tanu Rabbanan. Says the Gemara in the name of the Tanaim, Machanem Hayotzos Lemilchemes Harishus. What are we talking about here when we say Machanem in our Mishnah? We're talking about a war. When someone is going out, when the Jewish people are going out for a milchem, not a milchemes mitzvah, that's different, but from a milchemes rishus, I want to go conquer a land, something along those lines. So then these 4 leniencies come into place. You can take only dried wood. You cannot take wood that is seemingly that is still attached to a tree, which is still moist. We're going to get into that in a little bit. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Huda ben Tema Omer, Afchonen b'chol makom. You can even just make camp wherever you want. Just plunk yourself down. Squatter's policy, just sit. Uvemakom shenehergin sham nikbaran. As well, if God forbid people die during war, an unfortunate casualty of war, a normal result of Nebuch is that when people die, the halacha is you can bury them on the spot. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. You said mutar begezel etzim yiveshim, that's a Mishnah? It's not a Mishnah. That's from Yehoshua, way before the Mishnayos, right when we got the Torah. Haita kanta the Yehoshua hava. What are you talking about? Damar mar. We learn, I think this is in Bava Kama, Asara Tanaim, Hisna Yehoshua. There were 10 conditions that he made, and one of them was Shiumarin be'chorshen u'malaktan eitzim misadosein. You're allowed to graze in forests, and you're allowed to take wood from fields. So what are you talking about? How could it be the way that you're saying? It's not our Mishnah that's making this whole kula about Milchemes Rishus. Yoshua said that way before the Mishnayos. That doesn't make any sense. So says the Gemara, you're right, there is a distinction. Hasam v'hizmi v'higi. What that was by Yoshua, it was only talking about like a bush, like smaller trees. And the hacha b'shar eitzim. Here, our Mishnah was expanding the kula to be even by trees. Another possibility, inami hasam b'mechubarim. Maybe there Yoshua was only being lenient in regards to that which was attached to a tree, but something that someone already cut off the tree, dried it out, maybe that you should not be able to take. They work so hard. And then says the Gemara, hacha b'tlushin. But here, our Mishnah is expanding Yehoshua from mechubarim to even tlushin, even to things that were already severed from the tree. Inami, a third answer, hasam b'lachin, hacha b'yaveshin. Over there, Yehoshua only allowed taking moist wood, which is not very good for firewood. If you've ever taken wet wood and put it on a fire, it's very, very hard to light. I mean, this is in days without having kerosene and without having lighter fluid. It's very, very hard to light wet wood. It takes a long time to dry it out. And hacha b'yaveshin, and our Mishnah is coming to expand Yehoshua to say that Yehoshua wanted to say only by lachem, and our Mishnah came to say only by yaveshin. All right, says the Mishnah, we quoted this shita, that Rabbi Huda ben Tema Omer Avchonim b'chol makom, and then the last end of the Mishnah was, and this is the one that our Gemara is going to focus on, Uva makom shenehergen sham nikbaran, that when people are killed, that's the place where they get buried. Shita, obviously. Meis mitzvahu, umeis mitzvah konim ekoma. What are you? Everyone knows that. Meis mitzvah is not only, it's a mitzvah, it's like a trump card mitzvah. It takes over so many other things. Megillah, like you'll see Maseches Megillah, we'll learn this in many, I don't even know when, a long time. So it's going to be a while, but we've already learned that a meis mitzvah is a serious deal. We don't mess around with that. The person died, you bury them on the spot. Well, of course you can do that. So says the Gemara, lo tzricha. No, that's not correct. It's not so pashut. Afal gad to isle kovrin. No, it's not really a meis mitzvah. Turning to the top of the Zion of the page, it's not really a meis mitzvah. What it is a regular mace, because this person has kovrin. A meis mitzvah is someone who has no kovrin. No one's there to bury them. No one's responsible for that person. A meis mitzvah is when you see a yid on the road and there's no one to take care of him. Does anybody know who this is? Nobody knows who they are? Then it's your burden to bury them on the spot. That's meis mitzvah, but that's not this. Tanya, the Brisa writes, Ezehu meis mitzvah. What is the definition of a meis mitzvah? A person who you are burdened to bury on the spot. Says the Gemara, in the name of a Brisa, Kol she'ein lo kovrin. Koreh ve'acherim onenoso, ein ze meis mitzvah. If there are people, when you say, do you know who this is? And someone says, oh, Nebuch, that's a family member. They take responsibility for that person. So that's no longer a meis mitzvah. So then our opening question of the Gemara of Pshita is no longer so pashut. Because what the Mishnah's chiddush is now is that even though you're not a meis mitzvah, you're nikbar sham. Says Gemara, what do we do about that? Sorry, that is the chiddush of our Mishnah, that even though it's not a meis mitzvah, but because it's a Milchemes Rishus, so therefore the person is nikbar sham. Asks the Gemara, umeis mitzvah kana mekomo. Something's wrong with this. A meis mitzvah is not always kona mekomo. Why not? Because look at the following brisa. V'hatanya. The brisa writes, hamotze meis mutal bisratya. What if a person finds a dead body in the middle of a public place? And it's a meis mitzvah. So the din is mafnehu liyamin asratya or the small asratya. You move the body to the right or to the left. Sada bur v'sada mir. What if you find one in between two fields? One of the fields is unfinished, and the other is a sada near, it's plowed. So we have a pecking order. Mafnehu l'sada bur. You move it to the field that's less prepared. Next, the Brisa continues. Sada near v'sada zera. What if you have a field that's plowed or a field that's even more work done, which is that it's been planted already? So it says the Brisa mefnei l'sadanir. You move it to the lesser developed field. Hayushtehen niros. What if both fields were planted? Both were plowed. Shtehen zruos. Both of them were planted, or shtehen buros, or both of them were totally barren. Mafnei l'chol ruach sheyirtzeh. So what do we see from here? We see that not in every scenario is a meis mitzvah konim mekomo, because we see that you actually have a halachic requirement to pick a field that's less developed. And because you're doing that, v'haraya, the fact that you would pick, for example, a field that's plowed over a field that's planted, that shows us that a meis mitzvah is not konim mekomo. It's not right there. No, it depends. You may have to move the mace to bury him somewhere else. V'haraya, that a meis mitzvah is not konim mekomo. Amar Rabbi, he answers, no. Hacha b'meis mutal al ha-meitzar askinan. We're talking about a mace that is lying over the meitzar. Rashi, third line of the page. Rashi, Dibra hamaskal b'meis mutal al ha-meitzar. Rashi says, shemushkav b'rochav haderech mi-meitzar le-meitzar. The body is lying lengthwise across the road from border to border. Mitoch shenitan rishus lefnoso. So there we allow the person to move them anywhere. Says the Gemara back inside, the mace is lying across the width of the road. You're right, says the Gemara, that if we're dealing with a mace mitzvah, and it's just a simple question of which field to put him in, you're right, that's not where a mace mitzvah is konim mekomo. A meis mitzvah is konim mekomo when he's lying lengthwise across the road and traversing into various spaces. Then you have to bury them. Then you can move them wherever you want, or in theory, bury them there had it been appropriate. We don't bury a mace in the middle of a road because it compromises kohanim, which is obviously very problematic. I think I mentioned this at another time when we spoke about Tuma. I know you're a Kohen, there's others as well. The CRC put out a guide where in Chicago you should not drive if you're a Kohen, because there are trees that hang over cemeteries and trees that hang over the road. So it can be problematic. And I just had this for the second time. It's the second time I did this to my nephew, he's a katan, but he's a Kohen still. He's machbid, you should be careful. And we were driving over a non-Jewish cemetery, and there were leaves on the trees. It's already well past spring. And I literally drove on the other side of the road. Don't tell anyone, to avoid the tree. There's no traffic, it's fine. But that's a real shaila in halacha. Okay, bichlal, there's a shaila by tuma, by goyim, machlokas rishonim, if they have tumas mace. If you don't have the capacity to have a yiddish neshama, maybe you don't have the same tuma as a yid. That's possible. That's a good machlokas rishonim to speak about. But nevertheless, it's a good shaila. So you can't bury someone in the middle of the road. A meis mitzvah is konim makom. But here you had to move it for logistical reasons, not for halachic reasons about where the mace is konim makomo, but it's just a bad place to bury him. That brings us to the two dots, about a quarter of the way down Yud Zayin Amud Beis. Let us continue. Says the Gemara, you are not obligated to wash your hands during a Melchemes Reshus Amar Rabbi Lo Shanu Ela Mayim Rishonim. This is only true by Mayim Rishonim, Netilas Yadayim before a meal. Aval Mayim Achronim Chova. Mayim Achronim is an obligation. You cannot skirt that. Even during the Melchemes Reshus, you're obligated to wash Mayim Achronim. What if you only have one cup? L'chora, I'm just projecting on my own here, you should save it for Mayim Achronim, because you're pater for Mayim Rishonim and you're not pater for Mayim Achronim. That's a crazy idea. Today, we know that Mayim Achronim today is a subject to somewhat of a machlokes. We'll see, take a look at the top Tosfos. Tosfos on the top of the page, Dibra Hamaskal, Mayim Achronim Chova. Mayim Achronim, Tosfos says, Achshav, lo nahagu b'Mayim Achronim, de'ein melach stomis matzui b'nenu. We don't have this dangerous salt that would blind people when it would get in their eyes. Inami, or another reason, or because people would not stick their hands in salt at the end of the meal as like one of those things that they'd use to clean off their hands, kind of. We would, not only for bread, but it would also help to kind of like be an abrasive to clean your hands off from a dirty meal. So this is quoted in the Ramban Shulchan Aruch, that some Ashkenazim have the opinion to not wash Mayim Achronim. Within the Ashkenazi world, there's a split. Within the Sephardic world, the Shulchan Aruch paskins pretty black on white that one is obligated to wash Mayim Achronim. Granted, though, however, there is no bracha. And it is interesting to point out that Chamura Sakanta Me Isura is that here it's interesting that we're more machmir on the sakana of Mayim Achronim than we are on the mitzvah derabanan of Mayim Rishonim. Just an interesting thing to think about. Maybe we should have said, don't stick your hands in the salt and wash Netilas Yadayim Mayim Rishonim. We don't say that. That's what the Gemara says. That during the Milchemes Rishus, our obligation is for Mayim Achronim and not for Mayim Rishonim. Amar Rav Chia Barashi, Mipnei Ma Amru Mayim Achronim Chova. Why is it that we have this chiyuv of Mayim Achronim? Mipnei Shemelach Sodomis Yesh Shemesames Hainayim. Famous that there's this Melech Sodomis, which when it gets into one's eyes, it has the capacity to blind them. Amar Rabbi Mishtakcha Kikurta Bekura. It's only found in small percentages in salt. It's a smaller version within a larger set of salt. A kur is a larger amount, and the quart says less. Nevertheless, if one were to use that salt even in small portions, it could blind a person. Amar le Ravacha ber the Rava le Ravashi. Kayil milchamai. What would be the din if a person were to work with salt? Let's say you tan leather and you use these kinds of salts. Says the Gemara, Amar le hay lo miboya. What are you talking about? Of course you have to wash your hands. Wait. That's like a hygiene question. Like, do you have to wash your hands after you go to the bathroom? Of course you have to wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. So here, Pashut, you have a similar chova to wash your hands after working with salt as you would after eating salt. My nafkamina. Yeah.
Especially after a meal, that washing, would that include my machronim or no?
Asher yatar? You're saying if a person goes to the bathroom.
Right.
And then they wash their hands after going to the bathroom, does it count for Mayim Achronim?
Yes.
It's a good question. So first of all, one of the things that we see frequently when it comes to Mayim Achronim is that people put out these tiny little sprach cups that can hold like 3 ounces of water, and they pass it around to 20 people. Insufficient.
That costs $400.
It costs $400 because they're silver and they're annoying because they need polishing. Buy the cheap stuff, it doesn't need polishing. So that's not good enough. You have to be able to wash your hands mamish. That's first of all. Second of all, Shulchan Aruch and the poskim speak about the fact that when one washes Mayim Achronim, they cannot speak between then and the time that they bench. They should not talk at all. And you'll see that in homes where people are makbid on Mayim Achronim and on the halachos of Mayim Achronim. They will not say, they won't even talk. They'll just sit quietly until they bench. So technically would it remove Melech Sodomis? Yes, but it would not be following the general guideline of Mayim Achronim, which is that one should not speak after Mayim Achronim. So that's why we wash Mayim Achronim after Shir Malos. Even though Shir Malos is Torah, saying it's a parak of Tehillim, Afal Pike, and we still, for those who wash Mayim Achronim, it's better to not speak afterwards, even B'divrei Torah.
Michael, if you have one cup and you have to choose Mayim Achronim after Shalom or Ashiyatza, what are you going to do?
Only, please wash your hands. All right, Umi Demai. What about Demai? What about this, the food that we're unsure about its tithing because it was given to us by an Am Ha'aretz? Titnan Machilin So'anim Demai Achsanya Demai. We know, of course, from a Mishnah, that we are allowed to feed our poor company or our guests in general. We can give them Demai. Amar Rav Huna. Tana Beis Shammai Omrim Ein Machilin Nesanim Demai Besachsanya Demai. Beis Hillel Omrim Machilin Nesanim Demai Besachsanya Demai. After we learned the Gemara a few days ago about Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, we know that we always paskin like Beis Hillel. The Gemara here is just presenting, as always, Beis Shammai first. But nevertheless, we paskin like Beis Hillel to say that we are allowed to rely on Demai when it comes to Milchemes Mitzvah. Umi Le'arev, last sugya for the evening. Amrei Debei Rav Yanai Lo Shanu Elo Erev Chatzeros Aval Eruvei Tchumen Chayovin. Okay, where are we lenient? By Eruvei Chatzeros. Eruvei Chatzeros, to recall the last 17 blot or so, we only build Eruvei Chatzeros within a mavui frame so that people can carry in a mavui and from Chatzer to Chatzer, but it's already in a space that Midorais as the Rishus HaYachid. But says the Gemara, when it comes to Eruvei Tchumen Chayovin. No, there we do not do that. There we say, even if it's Milchemes Rishus, you still have to build an Eruvin in Milchemes Rishus. Why? Because the Tani Reb Chia Lokin al Eruvei Tchumen Davar Torah. That is an Isser Doraisa. You're not allowed to violate Tchum Shabbos. That's an Isser Doraisa. So that's an interesting question. We said you can violate Gezel a couple minutes ago by stealing wood. Might not kamina here. It's true that by Gezel we have no Malkos because it's a Lav Hanita Kla'aseh. That whenever the Torah stipulates a mitzvah doraisa in connection to an Isser Doraisa, there's no Malkos because you can pater yourself by doing another mitzvah, which is to return it. So what about over here? So let's see. It says the Gemara, Maskif la Rabbi Yonasan. Rabbi Yonasan asks a question. V'chilokin alav shebe al. The pasuk says al yetze ish mimikomo. That's our limitation by Tchum Shabbos, according to some. By the way, not according to everyone. Do we hold that Tchum Shabbos is an Isser Doraisa? Obviously, this Gemara is according to the Manda Amr that Tchum Shabbos is an Isser Doraisa. Otherwise, this question wouldn't have been raised at all. And seemingly a beautiful raya that Tchum Shabbos is an Isser Doraisa. But the pasuk says al, and the Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Yonasan al. If the language of the pasuk is al yetze, that's not enough to be chayiv malkos. Maskif Ravacha Bar Yaakov, what are you talking about? Elamayata, if that's true, we have another pasuk in the Torah, the Chsiv, Al Tifnu El Ha'ovos Ve'el Ha'yidonim. It comes to calling up dead bodies, which is Mefurish in Isser Darais and Sefer Dvarim. That says Al. Of course you're going to get Malkos for that. What are you talking about? The language of Al and Pen, all of those languages are Chayiv Malkos. Why are you intimating that there's no Malkos here? Of course there's Malkos here. Says Gemara, Hachanami Dlo Lucky, you'd say by Ovin Yidoni that there's not going to be any Malkos. Of course there is. Yonasan, Hachi Kashili. You misunderstood the question of Rabbi Yonasan. Lav shenitan la'azharas misas bezdin. This lav of Tchum Shabbos is nitan la'azharas misas bezdin because it's part of all the isurim of Shabbos. It's part of Meleches Shabbos, and therefore b'chol lav shenitan la'azharas misas bezdin. Ein loken Allah. Amar Rav Ashi miksiv al yotzi. Are we including this really in all of the isurim of Shabbos? Rather, it says al yetze ksiv. Says Rashi, last Rashi in the Perek al yetze ksiv ve'ein kan lashon hotzas masu. It's really not the language of carrying. And therefore, we would not have Malkos. Hadron alach mavui, hadron alach mavui, hadron alach mavui. We should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. Have a good night.